I want to lead off with three commemorations. First, we remember those slain in terrorist attacks in Sri Lanka on Easter Sunday. That was 1 year ago yesterday. Second, this week the administration honors the annual Holocaust Days of Remembrance. This is the 75th anniversary year of the liberation of many Nazi concentration camps where so many innocent people were murdered, including 6 million Jews. We bear witness to their stories so that such repugnant acts of evil will never happen again. Third, it's Earth Day, and especially in light of Secretary General Guterres' message released this morning to turn our recovery into a real opportunity to do the right thing. I want to remind everyone that the right way to achieve a greener, cleaner, brighter future for the world is to unleash private innovation and free market competition. It's what we've done here in the United States, but continue to be our model, and we are a world leader in reducing all types of emission. One simple data point from 2005 to 2018, the most recent year we have data, U.S. emissions decreased by more than 10%, even as our economy grew by 25%. China, conversely, has been the largest annual emitter since 2006, and it expects that its emissions will continue to grow until around 2030, thus offsetting the progress of countries all around the world in reducing global emissions. I would urge Secretary Guterres to make sure that we have the data right, the facts right, about who's actually delivering on the things that we all value. And on Earth Day, the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, I think that's especially important. Turning to the World Health Organization. I want to spend a few minutes telling the American people a little bit more about the problems that we're trying to work our way through. The WHO has two primary functions. First, it's a regulator and an advisory role and a health emergency and humanitarian aid operation on top of that. After the first SARS outbreak in 2003, the United States led the reform of the WHO. The WHO rules that govern how countries report on public health threats. So a major reform effort back 2003. Those rules, they're called International Health Regulations, went into effect in 2007. We set very clear expectations. We, the world, set very clear expectations for how every country must disclose data to protect global health. For example, Article 6 of the IHR says that each state party shall notify the World Health Organization within 24 hours of all events which may constitute a public health emergency of international concern within its territory. Annex 2 of those same rules provides that countries must notify the World Health Organization of any unusual or unexpected public health events such as SARS, a close genetic cousin of the virus that causes COVID-19. Those rules also said how countries should evaluate when to notify the WHO of diseases of unknown causes or sources. We strongly believe that the Chinese Communist Party did not report the outbreak of the new coronavirus in a timely fashion to the World Health Organization. Article 6 of the IHRs, which was a part of this reform, further mandates that a state party, that would include China, shall continue to communicate to WHO timely, accurate, and sufficiently detailed public health information. That is, there's an ongoing obligation. Even after the CCP did notify the WHO of the coronavirus outbreak, China didn't share all of the information it had. Instead, it covered up how dangerous the disease is. It didn't report sustained human-to-human transmission for a month until it was in every province inside of China. It censored those who tried to warn the world. It ordered a halt to testing of new samples, and it destroyed existing samples. The CCP still has not shared the virus sample from inside of China with the outside world, making it impossible to track the disease's evolution. Not making a legal determination here today on China's adherence to the IHRs, but the World Health Organization's regulatory arm clearly failed during this pandemic. I'd also note that when countries adopted these new rules in 2007, we also gave the Director General of the WHO encouragement and the ability to go public when a member country wasn't following those rules. And that didn't happen in this case either. That's why we continue to insist this is an ongoing requirement for transparency and openness according to the WHO rules, and the WHO has responsibility to continue to enforce them today. This transparency and getting it right is critical to saving lives today and in the future. I'll talk for just a minute about humanitarian aid. The United States is the most generous nation on the planet. has been for the past 3 years, will continue to be this year. Thanks to the American taxpayers, we've dedicated more than $140 billion in global funding for global health purposes in the past 2 decades. Today, I can confirm the United States is making an additional commitment of about $270 million to assist the most at-risk countries in fighting the virus, bringing our total to more than $775 million to date. We do this in lots of ways. We do this through multilateral organizations. We help our partners by sharing expertise. Today, the CDC has officers stationed in 59 countries and has helped train thousands of epidemiologists worldwide over the years whose knowledge is proving incredibly valuable. You should know it helps those countries. It saves lives in those countries, but this is a global pandemic, and that work protects us right here at home in America as well. Weeks before the first reported COVID case arrived in Guatemala, USAID helped the Ministry of Health there equipped a key hospital to start caring for its first patients. And the United States is training more than 70,000 pharmacists across Indonesia today so they can provide good advice and referrals. American generosity isn't limited to our assistance that comes directly from the United States government, our businesses, our NGOs, charities, all faith groups. This is an all-of-America approach to saving lives all across the world and protecting us right here at home as well. We estimate that the American people in CUME have given nearly $3 billion in donations and assistance just to fight this particular virus. America's global health commitments remain as steady as ever. Move on to a couple final points. I want to highlight 2 ways in which the Chinese Communist Party is exploiting the world's focus on teen crisis by continuing its provocative behavior. First, we commented on what's taking place in Hong Kong. We're amidst increased efforts by Beijing to erode autonomy. Law enforcement authorities have arrested pro-democracy activists, including 81-year-old Martin Lee. We've always said that China has an obligation to live up to its promises, its obligation. So I was speaking about the virus earlier, to live up to the rules that it put in place and it signed off on. We'd ask them to continue to do that here. You've also seen that the Chinese Communist Party is exerting military pressure on Taiwan and coercing its neighbors in the South China Sea, even going so far as to sink a Vietnamese fishing vessel. The United States strongly opposes China's bullying. We hope other nations will hold them to account too. Tonight I'll be in a phone call co-chaired by myself and my Laotian counterpart with every ASEAN member. I want to note too that we are now well along in developing the implementing policies required by the law in the NDAA of 2019, prohibiting use of Huawei and other untrusted vendors in U.S. facilities. Data that come into U.S. facilities will have to follow a clean path and reside in transit only through trusted systems, and we'll provide full details on that before too long. On Venezuela, as I've commented frequently from this podium, we're continuing to apply pressure on the Maduro regime, all the while seeking to provide humanitarian assistance for the Venezuelan people. As announced by the Department of Treasury yesterday, the general license, which allowed certain companies to maintain operations in Venezuela and PDVSA, expires today. The Treasury Department has announced a new, narrowly limited license for 7 months, which will allow companies that are operating there to begin their wind-down process. And with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, great. Nick?
Thank you, Morgan. Thanks, Mr. Secretary, for doing this. Let me try Iran, if you don't mind. The IRGC today said that it launched a military satellite into orbit for the first time. Could that technology be used for ICBMs? And we've seen from Iran expanded nuclear capacity, Iraqi militia, rocket attacks, harassing of a Navy ship. In recent days, after the Soleimani strike, there was talk of reestablishing deterrence. Do you fear that deterrence has slipped? And on China, there are millions of PPE items stuck in China, despite the fact they've been bought by U.S. companies. Do you believe the PPE is stuck because of red tape, China trying to make sure the quality is high, or because China is actually hoarding them and keeping them from the U.S.? Thanks.
As for your second question, I'll leave to the Vice President's task force to talk about those goods and their transit. The good news is we have seen China provide those resources. Sometimes they're from U.S. companies that are there in China, but we've had success. The Vice President and his team have talked about the air bridge that has delivered products to the American people from China. We appreciate that. We are counting on China to continue to live up to its contractual obligations and international obligations to provide that assistance to us and to sell us those goods. Often these are commercial transactions in a way consistent with all of the international trade rules. As for Iran, you noted the launch last night. The Iranians have consistently said that these missile programs were disconnected from the military, that these were purely commercial enterprises. I think today's launch proves what we've been saying all along here in the United States. The IRGC, a designated terrorist organization, launched a missile today. And I'll leave to the Department of Defense to talk about the details about that. But when you talk about the UN Security Council Resolution 2231, I think every nation has an obligation to go to the United Nations and evaluate whether this missile launch was consistent with that Security Council resolution. I don't think it remotely is, and I think Iran needs to be held accountable for what they've done. They've now had a military organization that the United States has designated terrorists attempt to launch a satellite. You talked about the naval ships. You saw the President's statement this morning. The President's been very clear to the Department of Defense and frankly to the State Department team too, to do everything we need to do to make sure that we protect and defend our officers, our military officers, our diplomats around the world, to continue to ensure that they are secure and safe. What he said this morning and what I know he's told all of us in leadership inside the government is take whatever action is necessary to make sure that you can defend and keep our people safe. I'm confident that the Department of Defense will do that in response to what the President said this morning as well. And then finally, you talked more broadly about deterrence. Two thoughts. First, the Iranian regime has gone around the world spreading disinformation in response to this virus. One of the things they've said is that, boy, we need resources in order to take care of the virus at home. And all the while, they are launching satellites, driving ships around the Arabian Gulf, coming and harassing U.S. naval vessels. They continue to underwrite Shia militias. They're working to support Hezbollah. Yesterday, my Iranian counterpart of the day before was in Syria, talking to the butcher in Damascus. I hope that the Iranian regime will respond to the Iranian people's demands to prioritize resources that the Iranian regime clearly has, to the health and security and safety of the Iranian people, rather than continuing their global terror campaign. You can see they're still hard at it. You can see they still have resources. You should note, at the very first news that the COVID virus had hit Iran, offered humanitarian assistance to the people of Iran. That offer was rejected. That offer still stands. We've assisted other countries at delivering humanitarian assistance to the Iranian people. I only wish that the Iranian regime cared about its people as much as the rest of the world has demonstrated that it does.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, we're hearing that there is panic buying in North Korea at the moment. I was wondering if you have any reading about what's going on there, and given the reports that Kim Jong-un is in very poor health, has the U.S. tried to reach out to Pyongyang for any information, and what was the response? And then a broader question on China, if I may. How would you say that the Chinese behavior, this disinformation that you are talking about, what effect do you think that has on a long-term relationship with the U.S.? Do you think it will damage it significantly?
Perfect, thanks. I don't have anything to add on North Korea. As the President said last evening, I think it was, we're watching closely what's taking place there, but I don't have anything to add. As for China, nations that desire to be part of the global landscape have obligations for truthful information, have obligations to share and be transparent and open. That's our expectation for every country. What I think you were referring to was you called it disinformation, seeking to transfer responsibility or to deny access to the world so that the world can figure out what's going on. You have to remember, these labs are still open inside of China. These labs that contain complex pathogens that were being studied. It's not just the Wuhan Institute of Virology. There are multiple labs inside of China that are handling these things. It's important that those materials are being handled in a safe and secure way, such that there isn't accidental release. We have an elaborate regime inside the United States to do that. Many countries do it as well. We have lots of regimes where, I'll give you an example in the nuclear context, where the world inspects sites so that we can ensure that there's proper handling. The United States spends a lot of money training others to help them handle nuclear materials in an appropriate way. We have to make sure that the Chinese government is handling those materials in an appropriate way, not only in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, but elsewhere. So this is an ongoing obligation that the Chinese government has, as well as an ongoing obligation of the World Health Organization that has responsibility for compliance with the rules. I hope I didn't bore you with them, but they're important to understand that there are a set of global regulations that the Chinese Communist Party signed up for. These aren't American rules we imply. These are rules that the Chinese government signed up for. And the World Health Organization has a continuing obligation, not just one from back in December, but a continuing obligation to make sure that those rules are being complied with today in a way that protects us not only from the ongoing pandemic, but a future one as well.
Michelle?
Thank you so much. Mr. Secretary.
Yes, sir.
First, have you delivered the President's warning to Iran directly? And second, are you concerned that the oil price will have an effect on the security and stability of the Gulf states and your partners in the region?
I never comment on internal communications between myself or private companies, between myself and my counterparts. So I don't have any comment on your first question. On your second one, the President's been incredibly focused on trying to create a more stable energy market in light of the enormous decrease in demand, right? You've seen crude oil demand fall somewhere between 20 and 35% over the past several weeks, and you've seen the price impacts that have resulted from that, right? You had the front futures contract trading for negative $37 for a few hours, a couple days back now. What the President did a couple of weekends ago and the work that he's engaged in today are twofold. One, to do everything we can to ensure that we preserve America's capacity to deliver on its energy resources here. And second, to work to try and create stability in the energy market such that you get price signals that are consistent with real demand. And that also means getting the global economy cranked back up again. A key element that will have the most significant impact on those price issues, on those supply chain issues in the energy industry, is getting the world back going and getting demand back to the levels we had back in October, November, and December of 2019. Here in the United States, we had one of the most robust economies that the United States has ever had. When we get back to those levels and the world gets back to those levels, those governments that depend for a significant amount of the revenue for their national GDP on oil will be in a better place they are today. There's real risk. With low prices and low volumes of demand, those countries are really going to face financial challenges, and we've been in conversation with many of them about how we can bridge that gap collectively.
Rich?
Mr. Secretary, hi.
Rich, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I'm good.
Given its failure to notify the WHO in a timely manner, do you think that the Chinese government owes countries or individuals compensation? And also, just as you'd spoken about the multiple labs within China, what's your assessment of China's handling of these dangerous materials? Do you think that they do a sufficient enough job of it?
So I'm going to leave the accountability piece of this for another day in terms of what we do to assign accountability and how we hold other nations accountable, other than to say is that the rule set, the WHO rule set itself contemplates nations complying with their obligations, and it gives the Director General of the WHO enormous authority with respect to nations that do not comply. And we expect every country who signs up for the international health regulations and the leadership at the WHO to then enforce them. And so we're counting on that. We're not counting on that not only retrospectively, but that continue today. What's the second question, Rich?
You'd mentioned multiple labs
Yeah.
within China.
I'm not going to comment on that. What I will say is it's always easier to know the answer to your question about whether these labs are in compliance, not only with the regulations, but if they're handling this material in a way that is adequate, safe, and secure, if the world can have access to those places, if they will share that information openly and transparently. And in spite, the President said this, we tried to get in to take a look at what was going on early on in this, to come in alongside the World Health Organization early on, would have been back in January, if I remember correctly. We still do not have a sample of the virus, nor has the world had access to the facilities or other locations where this virus may have originated inside of Wuhan.
Saeed?
Thank you, Morgan.
Sir, a new Israeli government was formed, the unity government between Mr. Netanyahu and General Gantz, and they vowed to begin annexing parts of the West Bank on the 1st of July. I wonder if you would have a comment on that. Also, on the aid, you recently released $5 million to the Palestinian Authority to fight COVID-19. They need a lot more. So will there be any more aid in the pipeline? Thank you, sir.
Two good questions. On the second one, we were happy to provide that $5 million of assistance. We hope that it'll get to the right place. Our concern with having provided assistance, the reason we stopped providing assistance previously was that these resources weren't getting to the place they needed to the Palestinian people. We hope that this money, this $5 million, will get where it needs to go to provide real assistance to the Palestinian people who, to your point, and I agree with, are going to need a lot of help as they move through this. We'll evaluate whether this $5 million both worked, delivered, and second, if there's more resources that are both either appropriate or can be delivered in a way that actually gets to the Palestinian people. Your first question was about the election. We're happy with that a new government's formed. A fourth election we think wouldn't have been in Israel's best interest, but we'll leave that to them. We think it's not in the world's best interest. We're glad that there's a now fully formed government in Israel. As for the annexation of the West Bank, the Israelis will ultimately make those decisions. That's an Israeli decision, and we will work closely with them to share with them our views of this in a private setting.
I need to get the secretary to his next meeting, but we still have two special guests to continue this briefing, so.
Great. Thank you all. Thanks for being with me. Everybody have a good morning.
Thank you.